Yeah. Okay. So how the idea for this paper started was I was actually working on a paper about muscle strength. And I found an old paper in MSSC, which was correlating different fitness variables with mortality, like early mortality. And it was interesting that they didn't find a correlation between flexibility levels and earlier mortality. And that's kind of strange because it's not really difficult to find certain fitness variables that would correlate with earlier mortality, like muscle strength, cardiovascular endurance, and all these
strength. Yeah, right.
Yeah, heaps of evidence. And that was the sort of literature I was going through at that moment. And I just saw it was just kind of in like a random table. I was like, that's really interesting. So I did a little bit more searching around, and I found one other paper that also found that flexibility was not correlated with earlier mortality. Okay, so now I came from that strength and conditioning background in sort of the early mid 2000s, where the literature showing stretching acutely decreased your force output and all that. So I'm a strength training guy, and I have that bias. So I started to take a little bit deeper dive and take a look, what about like cross-sectional data? So if you take different groups of athletes, what's their flexibility levels look like? If you look at correlational data, does flexibility correlate with other health outcomes? So maybe it doesn't correlate with more early mortality, but maybe it correlates with, I don't know, something else, cardiovascular disease or something. It turns out it doesn't really correlate with a whole lot that's important. And I just found that really intriguing. And then you look at the athlete data, and there were these really interesting examples in the literature where the researchers were just really struggling to just come around to say it. And it was an example of a paper done in like elite lacrosse players or something. And they were measured, it was a profiling study. They had the players versus control participants, measured them on fitness variables. And the only one that the players scored worse on than the controls was their like sit and reach test performance. And instead of using that as evidence to say, flexibility maybe isn't all that important, they said, these players should really work on their flexibility. I'm like, what are you talking about? They are elite level. They're like the most physically fit humans on the planet. This is sort of suggesting that this flexibility thing maybe not as important as we used to think. So my paper was just going through a lot of that evidence, saying that basically I was trying, I say major component of physical fitness. So it's not that I think it's completely irrelevant, but basically that it should be kind of demoted or de-emphasized, at least within the framework of like the current ACSM guidelines, where they have flexibility sort of up there with muscle strength, cardiovascular endurance, body composition. I'm like, no, it does not correlate with health outcomes as much as those other components. It needs to be demoted. And then I also go on to explain, look, if you're someone that really likes flexibility and really likes stretching, if for your personal workouts, just go for it. Like do what you love. And if that's what gets you to the gym to do other things like get on the treadmill, lift some weights, great, go for it. But let's stop pretending that it's like super, super important, particularly in a society where overweight and obesity is becoming increasingly a problem. Those individuals do not need to be static stretching. They need to be physically active. They need to be walking or running or lifting weights. Stretching is not going to help them. It might help from maybe a mental health perspective if they, I don't know, it makes them sort of a bit more relaxed or eases stress. But that is not the way that stretching is currently framed within recommendations. It's framed from a perspective of the purpose of stretching is to improve your flexibility. But if anything, I think its benefits could also actually be a bit more mental health wise more than anything else.
Because it's the act of doing something. I guess it would be people who do yoga, they feel better after they do yoga or Pilates or Tai Chi or whatever. So
yeah.